Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise and give you the essential knowledge you need fast. Today, we are tackling something, well, pretty substantial.
Monumental, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing a deep dive into sources that explore the attributes of the divine. We're talking about existence, wisdom, power, holiness, goodness, dominion, patience, the big ones.
It's quite a journey we're embarking on. These sources, they really synthesize centuries of thinking philosophy, observations from nature, some deep theological arguments, all trying to define, the highest possible being and the perfections associated with him.
And our mission today, let's be clear, is to get right to the core. We want to pull out the most compelling arguments about what this divine essence is and what it means for us, for human life, and how we understand things.
Right. We're starting with why these texts frame denying God as, well, as the height of folly. Then we'll define his essential nature, spirit, eternal, immutable, those core characteristics.
And we can't stop there, obviously. If you define this being, you have to ask how such a being governs the world. So we'll look at his intelligence, omniscience, and his wisdom, how it all fits together.
Yes, culminating in how this understanding shapes something really practical.
Yeah.
How worship is structured, or how it should be structured, according to these sources.
Okay, let's dive in. We're starting with a pretty bold claim, maybe even a controversial one for some listeners. Why these texts call atheism not just a disagreement, but fundamentally foolish.
Yeah, the source material doesn't mince words. It straight up labels the atheist a great fool. But, and this is key, it's not meant just as like an insult.
Right, it's a philosophical point.
Exactly. It's a statement that atheism fundamentally clashes with reality on two fronts.
And those are?
First, nature itself, the way the world is structured, which the text assumes is God's creation. And second, what they call the universal ascent of mankind. The basic idea is that almost everyone, everywhere, has always had some sense of a higher power.
So saying there is no God is presented as contradicting this deep, maybe innate human understanding. Hence, the label fool, it's seen as going against reason itself.
Precisely. But then the sources make a really interesting shift. They acknowledge that maybe outright theoretical atheism, someone genuinely arguing God doesn't exist, might be less common or maybe less of a practical issue than something else.
Which they call practical atheism. That term really jumps out. Feels very modern, doesn't it?
It really does. They argue that this practical atheism is, and this is a direct quote, natural to corrupted man. It's the real danger, they suggest.
So what does it look like? It's not about shouting denials from the rooftops.
No, not necessarily. It manifests more subtly, either through inconsideration of God, just living as if he isn't there, not factoring him into your thoughts or plans, or through a misrepresentation of his nature, thinking of God as, weak or blind or maybe just uninterested.
So it's living as if God doesn't matter, or as if he's fundamentally different from what these texts claim he is. It's conduct over creed, in a way.
Exactly. And the texts trace how this plays out. It starts internally.
The fool hath said in his heart, that famous line.
Right. Once the mind sort of permits this functional non-existence of God or this misrepresentation, then everything else gets corrupted. It leads to what the texts call sins of commission, actually doing wrong things, and sins of omission.
Which is failing to do good.
Yeah, summarized as, there is none that doth good. The failure to live rightly stems directly from this failure to acknowledge God properly, both mentally and practically, in daily life.
Okay, but why did the writers of these sources feel this was such an urgent topic then? They talk about a growth of atheism, even swarms of atheists. Was it really that prevalent?
Well, according to them, yes. They felt it was more numerous than in any previous recorded age. And critically, the urgency came because this atheism wasn't just a private thought anymore. It was being published with their lips. People were openly promoting it.
So it moved from an internal state to a public declaration.
And that's where the stakes get really high in their view. It shifts from just personal belief to the stability of society itself. The sources argue that atheism is fundamentally destructive because it pulls out the foundations of government and civil order.
Wow, that's a huge claim. How does belief in God function as a necessary foundation for government?
The argument is that the knowledge of God, specifically as a rewarder of good and a punisher of evil, acts as the essential tie upon the consciences of men.
A moral anchor.
Sort of, yeah. Think about it. Government relies on things like trust, justice, people keeping their word. Oaths are crucial in courts, in treaties, in political agreements. The sources argue that without belief in a supreme, all-knowing authority who holds people accountable, those oaths become meaningless.
Because there's no ultimate appeal, no ultimate witness.
Exactly. If you remove God, who are you swearing by? Who enforces the promise when human systems fail or can be deceived? Appeals to earthly power alone become arbitrary, potentially corruptible.
So they're saying, imagine a city composed entirely of atheists.
It would descend into chaos, they argue, because the only restraint left would be the immediate fear of human punishment. There's no internal moral compass compelled by a higher power, no reason to obey the law when you think you can get away with it.
So even just the basic knowledge or belief in God's existence acts as a kind of social glue, a guard of the world, as they put it.
That's the core argument. It's presented as essential for maintaining order and justice.
Okay, so to counter this folly, the sources then lay out proofs for God's existence. The first one you mentioned is universal consent. This idea that denying God is foolish because, well, basically everyone everywhere has always believed something.
Right. And the power of this argument, for them, lies in observation, not just abstract logic. They claim that you simply don't find any nation, no matter how isolated or different, that completely lacks any form of religion or belief in a supreme creator and governor.
Okay, but hold on. Someone listening now would immediately push back, wouldn't they? What about anthropology, showing diverse, sometimes contradictory beliefs? What about religions being used by rulers to control people? How do these sources address the idea that this consensus might just be, as they put it, a cheat, combination, or conspiracy to deceive?
That's exactly the objection they anticipate. They counter it by saying this consensus has specific qualities that rule out manipulation or mere coincidence. They say it's universal, found everywhere. It's constant and uninterrupted, present throughout history. And crucially, they argue it's innate.
Innate.
Meaning
People find it in himself. It's not just something learned from their parents or their culture, though that reinforces it. It's presented as a kind of natural dictate, something fundamental to human psychology, like a factory setting almost.
So even if the specific expression is flawed, like, say, worshiping an animal or a statue, the underlying impulse toward a higher power is still evidence of this innate sense. That's the idea. They'd say, look, people might argue about what God is like. Is he one or many? Was he born? Does he die? But the fundamental agreement, the judgment of reason across cultures, is that a sovereign being exists and deserves adoration.
They even mention skeptics, apparently.
Yeah, they point out that even philosophers known for doubting almost everything else found some certainty here. So, to dissent from this one point, the universal belief in some kind of supreme being is framed as contradicting human nature itself. And that, they argue, is inherently unreasonable.
Okay, that makes sense as an argument. It leads naturally into the second proof, the evidence from creation and nature itself. This feels more like a design argument.
It is. It starts pretty simply. The world clearly had a beginning. We see things come into being, grow, decay. That implies a starting point. It couldn't have existed eternally in its current form.
And it couldn't have made itself.
That's the next step. The argument against self-production is critical. If a person, for example, produced themselves, why didn't they do it sooner? Before existing, they had no being, therefore no will, no power to act, to bring themselves into existence.
You can't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps if you don't have bootstraps or feet or, well, existence.
Precisely. Producing life, especially conscious life, is presented as an act requiring immense, even infinite power omnipotence. And whatever has the power to create life must, they argue, have ultimate power in all things.
This then moves into the complexity of the design, right? The wisdom and design part. I like the details here about conflicting elements.
Yes, this is where they really marvel at the structure of the world. Think about basic elements: fire and water, heat and cold, dryness and moisture. Left to themselves, they're opposites. They constantly fight and cancel each other out.
Fire consumes water, water extinguishes fire.
Exactly. Yet, in the world, these opposing forces coexist. They work together in a balance that allows for life, for growth, for complex systems. This harmony, this balance against their natural tendencies, implies a superior wisdom governing them, holding them in check.
And they use the example of the sun's placement, too.
Yeah, it's positioned just right, conveniently, as the text puts it. Not too close to scorch us, not too far to freeze us. Its position allows it to light the stars as they perceived it, and crucially, provide the exact energy needed for life on Earth.
Plus the regularity of it all.
The sheer predictability. The sun rises every day, the moon goes through its phases, the stars move in reliable patterns. This constancy, this order that hasn't changed since creation, in their view, points to an unchanging power directing it all, not just a random, chaotic chance.
It's not just the huge cosmic scale either. They bring it down to the level of instinct in animals.
Right, these are like tiny signatures of that same designing wisdom. The swallow knowing which plant helps its eyes, the toad finding its specific antidote, the ant building elaborate granaries for winter.
Things the animals don't consciously understand.
Exactly. They act purposefully towards ends they aren't aware of, fitting perfectly into the larger ecosystem. Since the animals themselves don't have the foresight or the blueprint, the logic is that the genius, the instinct, must have been implanted by a higher intelligent being.
Which brings us neatly to the third proof, the evidence within humanity itself, our own bodies, our minds.
Yes, the human frame itself, its complexity, its beauty, its capabilities, is presented as bearing God's signature. And what's fascinating is the point about shared ignorance.
Meaning?
Parents don't fully understand how their own bodies work, let alone how a child is formed within the womb. And the child, obviously, has no idea either. We don't design or build ourselves. We are, in a sense, passive recipients of this incredibly complex form. This points, they argue, to an external invisible designer like a watchmaker who understands the watch, while the watch itself remains unaware of its own mechanics.
I also make a really interesting point about the sheer variety of human faces, the admirable difference of the features.
Yeah, think about it. Billions of people. Yet it's incredibly rare to find two who are exact duplicates. If existence were purely random chance, you might expect more repetition, more uniformity, like mass-produced objects.
But instead, we get infinite variety.
And this variety isn't just aesthetically pleasing, it's crucial for society. The text points out the confusion that would happen if we couldn't easily tell people apart, parents from children, criminals from innocent citizens. This unique differentiation is presented as another mark of intelligent, purposeful design, not chance.
Then there's the nature of the soul itself, the argument that mind can't come from non-mind.
Essentially, yes. A being that understands, that is conscious, is fundamentally superior to non-intelligent matter. Therefore, the source argues, our spiritual thinking nature couldn't have arisen from mere dust or not-thinking physical forces. A spiritual reality needs a spiritual source, and one that is higher, more perfect than itself. That source, they conclude, must be God.
And the final piece of internal evidence, maybe the one people feel most directly, is conscience.
Ah, yes. Conscience. It acts like an internal judge, constantly bringing us before a moral standard, often against our own desires. Think about guilt, or shame, or that nagging sense of right and wrong.
The key point being that we don't seem to control it.
Exactly. If we were truly sovereign over our own minds, why can't we just switch off guilt when it's inconvenient? Why can't we silence the fear that follows doing wrong? The fact that we have less power over our conscience than almost any other faculty suggests, according to the text, that its authority comes from outside us. It's an instrument of a supreme judge, constantly pointing us back to him whether we like it or not.
Okay, so we've looked at the arguments for why these sources say God exists. Now let's get into what they say he is. The first defining characteristic is that God is a pure spirit. What does that actually mean?
It means he's fundamentally non-physical. He's composed of understanding, will, holiness, wisdom, goodness, justice. These are his essence. He's not a visible substance, not made of matter.
And this is the foundation for all true worship, they argue.
Absolutely. Because if God is spirit, then relating to him has to be primarily spiritual, not physical. It also has some really important philosophical implications. For instance, it means God isn't compounded of parts.
Right, that sounds technical. Why is that detail not being made of parts so important?
Well, think about anything made of parts. Its existence depends on those parts coming together and staying together. It's contingent. If God had parts, his existence would depend on those parts. He wouldn't be ultimate. He wouldn't be self-existent.
He'd be dependent, not absolute.
Exactly. And he couldn't be perfectly unified. To be truly infinite, independent, and the ultimate reality, he must be perfectly simple. His essence is just himself, not a collection of components.
Which makes any attempt to represent him physically
fundamentally wrong, according to this view. Idolatry, making an image of God out of gold or stone or thinking of him like a human or an animal, is seen as infinitely degrading. The text says it's worse than representing a king as a frog. It misunderstands his basic nature. Man's tendency to do this, they say, has bestialized him in the form of a brute.
So, understanding God as spirit is step one. Step two is eternity. How is his duration different from ours?
It's completely different. Time, for us, is sequential. Moments pass, they don't return. The future isn't here yet. Eternity, for God, isn't just a really, really long time. It's described as a permanent, unchanging state, the perfect possession of life without any variation. It has no beginning and no end.
It's all now for him.
That's a good way to put it. His entire existence, all his perfections, are fully present in every single moment eternally. He isn't becoming anything. He simply is. His essence today is exactly what it was before time began and what it will be after time ends. If his attributes, like wisdom or goodness, existed in time, they couldn't be perfect because they wouldn't have been fully present from all eternity.
And this attribute, eternity, is called the gloss and luster of all his other perfections. Why?
Because it guarantees them. What good is infinite power if it might run out? Or perfect love if it could end? His eternity means his wisdom, his power, his love, his justice are all permanent and reliable. This, the texts argue, is the bedrock for things like hope in the resurrection or trust in his promises because he endures unchangingly.
Which leads us directly to the third attribute, immutability. God doesn't change.
Correct. His essential nature and all his perfections, his wisdom, goodness, power, holiness, justice are absolutely the same, without any variation from eternity to eternity. Change, in the philosophical sense used here, implies imperfection.
How so?
Well, change is either for the better or for the worse. If God could change for the better, it means he wasn't perfect before. If he could change for the worse, it means he's not eternally perfect or infinite. Since he is defined as the supremely perfect, simple, and infinite being, he cannot change. Change implies moving from one state to another, which suggests a lack of completeness or potential decay.
Okay, but this is where it gets tricky, right? The Bible itself talks about God changing his mind or repenting. And his actions clearly change. He blesses people, then later judges them. If he's immutable, how can his relationship with creation be so dynamic?
That's the crucial paradox to unpack. The sources are clear. The change happens in the creature, not in God. His essential nature and his will remain constant. He eternally wills to love righteousness and hate wickedness.
So when a person or even an angel, like Lucifer, turns from good to evil,
God's reaction changes, but his nature doesn't. His unchanging holiness, which always hates impurity, now relates differently to that creature because the creature's state has changed. His love is still there for righteousness, but his justice now applies to the new state of rebellion.
use the analogy of the sun, right?
Yeah. Yes. The sun shines consistently. Its light and heat are constant. But that same sunlight can melt wax and harden clay. The sun didn't change. The objects responded differently based on their own nature. Similarly, God's immutable nature interacts differently with a person depending on whether they are in a state of obedience or rebellion. The change is in the recipient, not the source.
So what about those biblical passages where God repents, like threatening to destroy Nineveh and then relenting?
The interpretation here is that repentance describes a change in the outward administration or the event, not a change in God's eternal plan or his nature. The threat against Nineveh was always implicitly conditional. Unless you repent, you will be destroyed.
So when they did repent, God withdrawing the judgment wasn't him changing his mind in the human sense.
Exactly. It was the enactment of his eternal, unchanging decree, which always included mercy for the repentant. His plan from eternity was judgment if they persist, mercy if they turn. Their turning simply triggered the mercy clause of the unchanging plan. It shows his wisdom and consistency, not fickleness or change of heart. The unfolding events reveal his single, timeless purpose.
Okay, we have his core essence, spirit, eternal, immutable. Now let's look at the scope of his intelligence, starting with omnipresence. God is everywhere. But it's more nuanced than that, isn't it?
Much more. The texts emphasize he is both at hand, intimately present, and afar off, filling the entire cosmos. His essence isn't constrained by space or location, and crucially, this presence isn't like spreading something thin to cover a large area.
What do they mean by not by extension or diffusion?
It means his entire infinite essence is fully present at every single point in space, simultaneously. If you could imagine millions of new universes popping into existence, he wouldn't need to stretch himself or dilute his being to fill them. His infinity means he's already fully there, in his complete essence, everywhere. It's not like a gas filling a room. It's more like his infinite being intersecting with every point of reality.
And they draw a distinction between his essential presence and his gracious presence.
Yes, that's important. His essential presence sustains everything. It's the power that holds the universe together, that keeps every atom in existence. All things exist in him, in a sense. But his gracious presence is more specific, more relational.
That's where he chooses to dwell.
Right, like dwelling in believers as his temple, offering specific guidance, comfort, fellowship. So he's essentially present everywhere, upholding all things, but graciously present in a special way with those who are his.
And the big implication of omnipresence, especially for someone trying to live outside of God's ways.
It makes hiding impossible. The sources really emphasize the folly of thinking you can sin in secret. Shut the door, draw the curtains, wait till midnight, it doesn't matter. God is already there.
Not just observing, but present in his full nature.
Exactly. Whereas his essence is, all his attributes are. His holiness is there, hating the sin. His justice is there, ready to enact consequences. His power is there. Even the physical strength the sinner uses to commit the act is borrowed, moment by moment, from the God they are offending by his essential sustaining presence. There's literally no escape.
Okay, so from his presence everywhere, let's move to his knowledge of everything. Omniscience. The text uses the plural, knowledges. Why?
It likely emphasizes the sheer breadth and depth of his knowledge. It's not just one kind of knowing, it encompasses everything. Knowledge is described as being part of his very essence. It's not something he acquires, it's who he is, the essence of God knowing. His greatness is unsearchable, and so is his knowledge.
How far does this infinite knowledge extend?
Infinitely, in every direction. First, he knows himself perfectly. His own nature, power, will, that's the foundation. Then, he knows all possible things, everything that could potentially exist or happen but doesn't. And he knows all actual things, everything that has happened, is happening, or will happen.
And he knows it all, simultaneously.
Yes. Past, present, future, it's all equally present to his mind. Just as all time is one now to his eternity, all of reality, all possibilities are like a single thought to his infinite intellect. He sees the entire tapestry at once, effortlessly.
Does this include, like, the tiniest details? Our thoughts?
Absolutely. The sources are very clear on this. He knows the secret thoughts, the hidden intentions, the deepest motivations and affections of the heart. He weighs the spirit. He knows not just the actions, but the why behind the actions.
And he knows them even before we think them.
Yes, he knows them before they even arise in our consciousness. This complete, instantaneous knowledge of the inner person is presented as essential for him to be a truly righteous judge. Human judges can only see outward behavior, but God judges the heart, the motives, the spring of the action. Without that, justice wouldn't be perfect.
Okay, this inevitably brings us to the classic problem: foreknowledge and free will. If God knows exactly what I'm going to choose tomorrow, how can my choice actually be free? Doesn't his knowing it make it necessary?
This is probably one of the thorniest issues, and the sources tackle it head-on. Their resolution maintains both God's perfect knowledge and genuine human freedom. They state clearly that God foreknows the free, voluntary actions of humans.
So he knows what we will freely choose, not what we are forced to choose.
That's the distinction they make. His foreknowledge doesn't cause the action or impose necessity on the action. It's more like he perfectly perceives the future reality, including the reality of choices that will be made freely.
So, using their example, Joseph's brothers freely chose to sell him into slavery. God foresaw this free choice, but he didn't make them choose it.
Correct. Their choice originated in their own wills and desires. God's knowledge was a perfect reflection of the event that would occur through their free agency. His knowing it didn't remove their responsibility.
Why is it so important for God to know these free choices in advance?
Because if he didn't know, contingent events, things dependent on free will, his governance of the world would be reactive, not proactive. He'd always be adjusting his plans based on what humans unpredictably did.
Governing pro re nata, as they put it.
Right, governing as the situation arises. That would imply his plans are dependent on creaturely choices, that his decrees are constantly being revised. That picture, they argue, is unworthy of an infinite sovereign God whose wisdom plans everything from eternity. His foreknowledge allows his eternal plan to incorporate and work through human free choices without being derailed by them.
Okay, so if omniscience is God knowing everything, wisdom is about how he uses that knowledge, how he acts.
Precisely. Wisdom is the practical side of his intelligence. It's the perfection that guides his power and knowledge, ensuring that everything he does is fitting, purposeful, effective, and, well, wise. Nothing is done randomly or inefficiently.
And we see this wisdom displayed first in creation itself.
Yes, the sheer variety and complexity that comes from simple starting materials. Think about fish and birds supposedly coming from water, or humans from dust, according to the creation accounts. The intricate forms extracted from basic matter point to incredible wisdom.
They also highlight the utility of creation, like the sea.
Right, the sea isn't just a big puddle, it's a source of food, a fish pond, a highway for commerce, and crucially, the source of rain. The text describes this amazing process. The sun evaporating the water, leaving the salt behind, the atmosphere holding these vapors in clouds against gravity, transporting them, and then releasing fresh water over the land.
It's a perfectly designed hydrological cycle, essentially.
An incredibly complex, self-regulating system where different parts of nature work together for a specific outcome, watering the earth for life. Creatures and elements acting for ends they don't understand, all fitting into a harmonious, intelligent design.
But the sources argue that the absolute peak display of God's wisdom isn't even creation, which became flawed by the fall. It's redemption.
Yes, the grand design of redemption is presented as wisdom's masterpiece. Why? Because it solved the ultimate problem, the ultimate paradox, reconciling God's perfect justice with his perfect mercy.
Explain that tension again.
Okay, so after humanity's rebellion, divine justice demanded a consequence. The law was broken. A penalty was due: spiritual death, separation from God. But divine mercy desired to save, to rescue the creature he loved.
How do you satisfy justice, which demands punishment, while also showing mercy, which desires pardon? This seemed contradictory.
Exactly. If God just ignored the sin out of mercy, his own justice and holiness would be compromised. He'd essentially be saying his law doesn't ultimately matter, which would undeify himself. That's impossible for an immutable God.
So wisdom had to find a way to uphold the law and save the sinner.
Precisely. And the solution, according to these texts, was the God-man mediator, Jesus Christ the Son. He was uniquely qualified. As the Word, he could speak to God for us. As the heir, he could reclaim the inheritance we forfeited. But critically, it was his two natures that made it work.
Fully God and fully man. Why was that essential?
His divine nature gave his sacrifice infinite value, sufficient to satisfy infinite justice. A mere human sacrifice wouldn't be enough. It also gave him the power to overcome death and make his compassion effective.
And his human nature.
His human nature allowed him to actually live under the law, obey it perfectly in the same nature that had failed. It allowed him to truly suffer the penalty for sin, to experience our weakness, and to act as a relatable representative. He could pity us as a man and save us as God.
So if he were only God, he couldn't suffer the penalty. If only man, his suffering wouldn't satisfy infinite justice.
You've got it. Wisdom found a way for the judge himself to become the sacrifice, satisfying his own justice upon himself, in a sense, through the mediator. It reconciled the greatest hatred of sin with the greatest love for the sinner. The sin is punished, the sinner is saved, and God's character remains perfectly consistent.
And the final piece of wisdom in this plan, they argue, is the condition for receiving this redemption: faith. Why faith specifically? Why not works or merit or something else?
Two main reasons given. First, it's perfectly suited to our fallen condition. We've lost our original innocence, so a system based on earning salvation through perfect obedience is impossible. Faith is accessible even to the broken and sinful.
And the second reason?
It serves the ultimate goal of glorifying God alone. Remember, the fall involved pride, wanting to be independent, like God. So the way back must involve humility and dependence.
And faith, by definition, is relying on someone else, trusting their work, not your own.
Exactly. Faith is inherently self-emptying. It requires us to stop trusting our own efforts, our own reason, our own goodness, and rely entirely on God's grace and Christ's work. It brings the creature low and ensures all the credit, all the glory goes to God, which is seen as the only fitting outcome, the wisest possible arrangement to reverse the effects of pride.
So we've established God as spirit, eternal, immutable, omniscient, supremely wise. Where does this leave us in practical terms? The sources say it leads directly to how we should worship.
Right. If God is spirit, then worship that truly connects with him must also be spiritual. It has to be primarily inward, sincere in spirit and truth, as the famous phrase goes.
What does that mean, in spirit?
It means engaging the core of our being, our mind, our affections, our will. It requires concentration, focus, the cream and flower of the soul, as one text puts it. We are most like God in our spiritual capacity, so true worship must happen there. It's not just about physical posture or location, it's about the heart's orientation.
Which means just going through the motions is not enough.
Not nearly enough. The sources strongly condemn merely outward acts performed without genuine inward engagement. They call it carnal worship.
Things like holy.
A rolling eye and a fill in the air with a few words, while the heart is cold or distracted. It's compared quite harshly to offering a beautifully dressed carcass. Looks good on the outside, but dead inside. Or bringing an empty purse to someone you owe a great debt. It's Pharisaical devotion.
Sacrilege even, giving God the shell but keeping the kernel, the heart, for ourselves.
Exactly. But realistically, what about distractions? We've all been there trying to pray or focus and worship, and suddenly you're thinking about your grocery list or work tomorrow. Those busy gnats, as the text calls them. Does that invalidate the worship? The sources are actually quite understanding here. They acknowledge the heart can be like a forest with wild beasts lurking, unwanted thoughts intruding. The key distinction they make is whether these distractions are allowed or resisted.
What's the difference in practice?
If distractions come, but you fight against them, you try to refocus, you lament them, that's seen as a sign of spiritual weakness, perhaps, or just the struggle of living in a fallen world. But it doesn't necessarily mean your worship is insincere. The struggle itself shows there's a genuine desire, a principle of contrariety fighting against the flesh.
But if you just let your mind wander, entertain the distractions, make no real effort to engage.
Then it becomes evidence of a lack of sincerity, a muddy heart, as they say. If there's no attempt to maintain that holy flame, then the worship is likely just external.
And this brings us back one last time to practical atheism. They argue it can show up even during religious service. How?
One way is by prioritizing the wrong things. When people are more concerned with these ceremonial aspects of religion, the rituals, the man-made rules, things that depend solely on the lawgiver's will, than they are with the core moral commands that reflect God's actual nature, like holiness, justice, mercy.
So being really meticulous about, say, the order of service, but neglecting kindness or honesty outside of worship.
Precisely. It's preferring the external rules, which might be easier to follow, over the internal transformation required by God's character. It's being more willing to observe external attendance than to crucify inward lusts.
It's like Pharaoh making vows during the storm.
Exactly. When things got tough, he'd promise anything. But as soon as the pressure was off, his promises vanished. That reveals the default setting of the heart, according to these texts. We are naturally more willing to displease God than displease ourselves. When we conveniently ignore or downplay the parts of God's commands that challenge our desires or idols, we are, in effect, acting as if he isn't the true authority. We're trying to unlaw his law, which is a form of practical atheism. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, okay, that was a really dense but incredibly rich deep dive. We've gone from philosophical arguments for God's existence through defining his core, spiritual, eternal, unchanging nature,
to seeing how that nature informs his omniscience and his profound wisdom, especially shown in the plan of redemption.
and the clear takeaway, the application that flows from all of this is the absolute necessity of worship being spiritual, sincere, coming from the heart, and demonstrated in genuine obedience, not just outward show.
Right. And that idea we touched on keeps coming back.
Yeah.
Sin itself is presented as a kind of functional undeifying of God. It's choosing our will over his, setting ourselves up as the ultimate authority in our own lives.
And the measure of that insult, they argue, is what we choose instead of him, slighting the infinite creator for, as they put it, a single vanity or a base lust, prioritizing something small and temporary over the claims of the eternal God.
It's the ultimate dishonor, choosing the lesser thing to occupy the throne of the heart.
So as you go about your day, maybe processing all of this, here's that final thought to mull over, drawn from these sources. If God's immutability means his justice against sin is as certain and unchanging as his promise of grace through faith, how does that dynamic, the certainty of both judgment and grace, shape your daily choices? How does the fear of unchanging justice and the security of an unchanging loving nature fuel a truly spiritual faith?
That tension, I think, is really where authentic spiritual life happens, between the sobering reality of justice and the incredible security of grace.
Definitely something to think about. We'll see you on the next deep dive.